All right, hello again. This is Jeff Scott, your instructor for the online version of 152, 157, Website Development, XHTML, CSS for the fall 2015 semester at Blackhawk Technical College. I'm now going to be going over the PowerPoint presentation for Chapter 6 of our Terry Felk Morris text. Chapter 6 is entitled Page Layout. And here are our objectives. We'll talk a little bit more about the CSS box model, talk about margins, and I've already mentioned both those a little bit, talk about floats, which is an important concept, the compare and contrast fixed, relative, and absolute CSS positioning, talk about how to create a two-column layout using CSS, how to configure navigation in unordered lists and styling with CSS, add interactivity to links with pseudo-classes, hover, visited, etc., and configure web pages with HTML5 structural elements, including the section tag, article tag, and aside tag. So you saw this before, but I'm going to bring it up again anyway. So I'm going to get in here, get a fresh browser here. And I'm going to Google, and again put in the CSS box model when this comes up. Now my machine's reacting very slowly. I've just got a boatload of stuff on it, and I've got to clean it up, and that's why it's so bad. Now W3 Schools will give you a very simplistic view of the box model. All HTML elements, so anything you put on a document can be considered a box. So the box model, as they say, is essentially a box that wraps around elements, and it consists of the margin, and inside of the margin is the border, inside of that is the padding, and inside of that is the actual content. So you can see it right here. And as the author says, the content is the content of the box, whatever it is. Just colors, an image, text, whatever. Padding is the area that's around the content. The border is what goes around the padding and the content. And you don't necessarily even need a border. If you don't have a border, you go right from padding to margin. And the margin is the area outside of the border. Again, one of the reasons I like this, notice what they have here. They set up a div, and you can see exactly what's going on in here. And you can tell, for example, if I come through here and change this from a 25 pixel solid navy border to a 5 pixel, you can see the big difference between the two. If I go from margin equal 25 to margin at 125, you can see where it moves it on the screen. All right. Now, if you want a more exhaustive explanation of what the box model is, you can go out here to developer.mozilla.com. You're going to see a lot of the same stuff. All right, I guess it isn't that much more extensive. But I know, for example, if we go out here to the W3 school sites, this will be very large. There's all sorts of examples in here too. All right. So again, I'm not going to read this to you, but you can see all the different areas. We've already talked about them. All right. The margin property of CSS, again, if you put in 4 numbers like we have here, margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left. So if you want to just say margin and put numbers in like this, totally fine. If you want to literally put in margin top, or margin hyphen top, margin hyphen right, margin hyphen left, and margin hyphen bottom, you can do that also. So this is the shortcut. This says 0 margin all the way across. Turn off all margins. I believe that this says 20 pixels. When there's only two numbers, I believe it'll be 20 pixels top and bottom, and 10 pixels right and left. I'm not sure exactly how. Well, there's three of them on here. I think probably top, right, bottom, and there would be no left margin. Okay, and I already mentioned this one. 20 pixels on the top, 30 pixels on the right, 0 pixels on the bottom, 30 pixels on the left. You can combine this any way you want. So here we're configuring margin with CSS, and here we're doing padding with CSS. And notice, as always, what she's done here is she puts that in the background. So again, padding and margin. There's an example of the box model in action. I showed you other examples of the box model in action, including that 3D model. All right. So again, the margin is the content is, in this case, it's the blue, and it's everything that says examples of the box model. All right. The padding is the area here, 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 and here. So it's basically the area of the content that's not the actual content itself. Then we have a border all the way around, and outside of the border we have our margin. I'd say that out of what we've done so far, this is a theoretical topic, but it's one that you should read and ideally understand. All right. Browsers render your web page code line by line in the order it appears in the document. This is called normal flow. Normal flow displays the elements on the page in the order that they appear in the source code. So in these two examples, what you can see right here is these are two div elements that contain text content. In one case, we've used nested divs. So in here, this div is inside of this div. In here, we have non-nested divs. This will go around with a hands-on practice that's on page 243. All right, let's talk about the float property. Sometimes you want to force something to the left or to the right. And as they mention here, elements that seem to float to one side or the other of the browser window, all right, typically we'll use this float property. So you use it, for lack of better words, to kind of force something to happen. The browser will render the elements using the normal flow and then shift them either to the left or right as far as they possibly can within their container. Sometimes you don't want that to happen anymore. In other words, you don't want to have a float left or a float right anymore. Quite often you'll float something in your content area, but then your footer you won't want floated to the left or the right. So you use the clear property to terminate, okay? So you can clear left, you can clear right, or you can clear both. Notice the difference here. The H2 text is displayed here in normal flow. All right? And here we did a clear left. And once we did that, it comes after the image. Sometimes the only way to learn about this stuff is to actually do it. All right, just sit and practice and play around with it. The overflow property can be used to clear a float, but its intended purpose is to configure how content should display if you try to put the proverbial 10 pounds worth into a 5-pound bag. If you say visible, which is the default value, the content is displayed. If it's too large, it'll overflow and extend outside the area that you allocated to it. If you say hidden, the content is clipped to the area that's allocated and the rest you don't see. If you see auto, scroll bars are displayed, horizontal and or vertical scroll bars as necessary. And if you say scroll, the content is rendered in the area allocated to it, and again, scroll bars will definitely be displayed. Speaking of displayed, the display property here. Notice that the display property, you can say one of three things. Display none, display block, and display inline. Let's take a quick look at an example of each one of those. So I'm at home now, so that's why if it sounds a little different in here, that's why it would. So I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to just put a couple little things in here. This is not even going to be a complete let's see, settings, preferences. I know there's a way in here that I can change the font size, but I don't remember what it is right now inside of here. So doc type HTML, HTML. I'm not going to worry about putting hardly anything in here. Title, test document, okay. All right, and we're going to come in here. Just going to add just a couple things. All right. So first, we'll come in here and we'll say to read more. Let's make it a paragraph. To read more about Blackhawk Technical College, please click the link. All right. Again, I'm keeping this really simple. I'm going to save that to the desktop, and I'm going to save that as index.html. All right, now I'm going to run it. To read more about Blackhawk Technical College, please click the link. And if I click it, as you'd guess, I go to Blackhawk. Okay, that's fine. But what if I come through here and I don't want that particular underline to display? Okay? So I'm actually jumping ahead right now, which I shouldn't be doing. But I can come in there and I can turn off the underlining. Okay? And to do that, I use what are called the pseudo-classes. Let me hold off on that just for a minute. All right, but I will turn them off very quickly. Display none means that an element will not be displayed. Display block, all right, render it as a block. Display inline makes it an inline. And as it says, you'll work with the property later in the chapter. Let's see if we can do something with this. All right, what I'm doing is jumping way the hay ahead, and I'm actually showing you something that's in about Chapter 9, but I want to see if I can get this to work so I can show you that display property. I created a very, very simple form. It's got a name here. For some reason, it doesn't show my text box, so let's see if we can fix that. The input didn't. I think the input does not have an ending tag. It's not showing. Doggone it. Input. Ah, that's because it's type equals text. Okay. Okay, so there's a very simple little form. All right. Now, I'm going to show you something here. I'm going to come in and make a modification. I'm going to add a little bit of CSS in here. I'm going to say label. Then I'm going to say display block. All right. Unless I did it backwards, they should look a little different now. Okay, it doesn't like what I just did. Label, display, I'm sure that that was the right syntax. Display block, display, Well, there's definitely an error in there. Type equals text. This is not necessary. Here, ID is name, name is name, type equals text. Try to say in display inline and see if that changes anything. No. All right. Rather than going on with this, I'm going to see if I can fix it once we get to that point. All right. So, as it says, the display property configures how an element will be displayed. If you say display none, it means basically don't display it at all. All right. If you say display block, what it should have happened right there with me saying display block is it should have put the label on with name on it on one line, then on the line below it, it should have put the actual text box for it. If you say label inline, that means keep it on the same line even if it shouldn't be on the same line. Again, we'll look at this some more in just a minute. All right, let's talk about a two-column page layout as they show here on page 249. You may or may not be able to tell, but what the author has done is she's created what's called a div, a division, and that's all the way around here. That's the outer square. Inside of that div, she has put in a navigation bar, a main area, and the main area has in it the header, the content, and the footer. So this is kind of a wireframe, and this is what it'll actually look like over here. All right, so how did that magic happen? There's a wrapper in here, and again, the wrapper takes up 80% of what's on the page. So there's 10% blank over here and over here. That's why it's important to set your background color accordingly. All right. and that the area that takes up the 80% is assigned a medium blue background that will display on the screen. The nav element that you see there is assigned to a fixed width and configured to float to the left. The right column is configured by a div element and is assigned an ID that's called right column, right col. It's configured with a margin to the left that's equal to or greater than the width of the left column. So in other words, what the author is starting to show you here is page layout. All right? Now the whole thing here is in a wrapper, and you don't have to use a wrapper, but many times what you find is that developers do put all their stuff into some kind of a wrapper element. Okay? All right. Let's talk a little bit about hyperlinks in an unordered list. If you look at the example right here, when you create an unordered list, notice that right now it appears and you've got the what are called the circles or disks on there, and you've got your home, your menu, your directions, and your contact. Then what the author did was they took the list style type and set it to none. That first line that you see right there, that got rid of those disks, so you can see they're not there. To say text decoration none, that removed the underlines. These are still hyperlinks when you put your mouse over them, but they no longer have the links underneath them. Maybe you don't want that. Maybe you want, instead of vertical navigation, you want horizontal navigation. All right? And the magic that makes that happen is right here, display inline, which means even though normally each of these would be on a separate line, by saying display inline, you're saying to it keep them all on the same line. I really do like the example that the author shows here. So let's use that one. All right, so we'll put in this. We'll put this into the quick little example that I've started with on here. So don't worry about this to read more, etc. I'll just comment all that out for right now. All right, we'll come in here and we'll just paste in what the author put in. Okay? Now, let's save this, and then let's view it in the browser without any CSS in it at all. I must have really balled this up royally because I've got a weird character or something in here that's making all of this stuff. Oh, I never finished my style tag. Here we go. All right, now it should actually show. There we go. All right, so that's what it looks like by default. Now, there is no menu, there is no directions, there is no contact page, so they're not going anywhere. All right, but if I come through here now and I grab that information that you saw here, in other words, if I put in this navigation that you see right here, so we'll put it in, then we'll come back and talk about it. So I'm going to remove that navigation that's there and put in this. This is saying that the UL, the unordered list, should have no disks or no beginning character associated with it. In fact, let's do this. All right. What we'll do is we'll put these in one at a time so you can see exactly what happens here. So there's our first one. All right. And you already saw what it looked like. Oh, I think I kept that. Nope. So let's bring that back up again. Now we've lost our disks that you see right there. So those are gone. All right, and let's go back in and let's put in the rest of it. So we'll do them one at a time. Again, the way that this literally reads here is it says any ULs that are in a nav tag have no list style associated with them. So no beginning character at the end, or at the beginning character rather. And any anchor tags that are in a nav, no underline, and give them 10 pixels of right padding. So I'm going to save that. That's what it looked like. Now let's refresh. Now the underlines are gone. Finally, let's come back in and let's add the last component. This says any list items, display them inline. In other words, after every list item, do not repeat, do not put them on a new line. There you go. That's how you create a horizontal menu as opposed to a vertical menu. All right, let's go back and revisit these pseudo classes that I talked a little bit about before. Notice that there are 4 of them. 2, 3, I guess 5 of them. Link, which is the default state for a hyperlink. Visited, which is a hyperlink that you've already gone to. Focus, all right, which means typically when the hyperlink has focus, so you've clicked on it. Hover, when you put your mouse over it. And active, so active is when it's being clicked, and I think focus is right after it's been clicked. All right, let's take a look at these examples that are right here. So I'm just grabbing that HTML as it's shown right there. Again, I like to put blank space before each one of these, but it's not that it's mandatory. Okay, so there's my first one. So I'm using one color for the link tag. Another color for visited. Another color when it has the focus. And another color when it's active. All right, so what we're going to do is, with this all set up now, is I believe we put that information in there before with the Blackhawk Technical College. I'm going to still comment out this form section that I have here. Oops, I want that. I do want that to be. But I'm going to take the earlier section that said to read more about Blackhawk, click here. So let's save this and let's run it in the browser. All right, so notice when I put my mouse over it how it changes color. Once I click it, you may or may not have noticed, but when I clicked it, it turned red when I held down on it. So it's kind of a black right now. It's blue when I mouse over it. It's red when I click it. So let's see how that looks as opposed to the CSS that we put in. There's red. That's when it's active. And it has the focus. We're giving it red in both those cases. There's the link color, which is kind of an off blue to begin with. And here's the color when we're hovering over it. So you can do all sorts of stuff. You can set up all sorts of effects, basically just about anything you want, especially with 16.7 million colors at your disposal. All right, there's an example. Print this page. Text hyperlinks are underlined by default, but if you want to, you can turn it off. We just looked at that. And again, if you've got the hover class, you'll notice how it changes color. All right. So the pseudo classes are explained in a little bit more depth and breadth of coverage on 254 and 255. Then there is a practice with a two-column layout on 257, 258, 259. Then on 260, we begin to talk about header text image replacement. All right, notice what it says here. Useful when a non-web safe font must be used in the header logo banner area. What a non-web safe font means is that it's a font that would not normally come with your computer. You have to go out and download it yourself. So it says here, display the banner image, but also configure text in the H1 for use by search engines and assistive technology. Code the company or website name with an H1 element and configure it to be beyond the browser viewport. All right, what the hell does all that mean? It's an H1 tag. All right, the text indent is set for 100%. Let's see exactly what that means. The text indent property specifies how much horizontal space should be moved before the beginning of the first line. All right, spacing is calculated from the left edge, and then they talk about the fact that if you come in here with 100%, exactly what happens. All right, so there's 2 M's, there's minus 2 M's, there's 50%, there's 100%. White space, no wrap. That means try to keep everything on one line if at all possible, and if there's any overflow, hide it. All right. Talking a little bit about the position property in here. This chart that you see, and what I just mentioned, if you don't get it, there is a hands-on practice for it, and we'll talk about that. All right. Then there's another hands-on practice with an image gallery, and we'll talk about that. Positioning with CSS, there's 4 basic types. Static, which is the default, so that the thing appears where it appears. And as you move up and down the page, the thing with the element, whatever it is, doesn't move with it. Fixed, where it always stays in the same position. Relative, you configure the location of the element relative to where it would otherwise render in normal flow. And absolute, all right, where it's precisely configured and it's in a certain spot. So, looking at each one of these, notice it's nav position fixed. If you use fixed positioning, it causes an element to be removed from the normal flow and remain stationary, or in other words, fixed in place. There's an example right there. And you might say, well, that's different than this. No, it's not. It's just that right here, we're showing the heading, including that logo, and down here, we're not. Relative positioning. It's used to change the location of an element slightly relative to where it would otherwise appear. So if you want something, this is 30 pixels from the left, using relative positioning. Otherwise, this would have appeared all the way over on the end. Absolute positioning. Again, if you're following along, I'm on page 266. You precisely specify the location of an element outside of its normal flow in relation to its first parent. That will be right there, and it will never move, regardless of how big or how small your screen size is. There's a hands-on practice for this on 267, 268, and the chapter ends by talking about some debug tips. So let's quickly talk about a little bit of this, the next 2 or 3 pages, and then we not too much left. When you have problems with your CSS and you have to fix it, it's known as debugging. First thing I want to mention to you is if you're in a CSS file, all right, let me grab my CSS that I put here and let's pull it out and put it in its own file. You know how to do this. We've done this before. So I'm going to come through here. All right, so I've moved everything over now, pretty much. Okay, it looks okay. And I'll just call this, since I've got my index.html page, I'm going to call this test.css. All right, so that's my CSS file. So in here, I can remove these two style tags and instead put in a link tag, href equals test.css rel equals style sheet. I believe that's all I need to put in there. So let's check. We've got our CSS. Okay. Now, what I wanted to show you is what if I decided in my CSS file I want to take this the visited. I want to comment this out. Well, I can't use HTML comments. You notice they don't turn green. I can't use what you use in some languages, which is // but instead I use /*. That takes everything from then on and makes it a comment, and if I put a // in, that turns off the commenting. All right. So what you should do when you're coming in here and you're starting to check about possible CSS problems, manually check your error for errors, and notice it says manually check syntax errors. A syntax error is an error in the rules of the language. You forgot to put a semicolon in. You spelled float wrong, something like that. Sometimes what people like to do is they like to take all the different parts of their screen. So when you look before, when we had this, I'm going to go way back here, there. They might take their wrapper and make it white. The header here might be yellow. The nav section might be green. The main part might be blue. The content area in here might be red, and this might be orange, or something like that. It's by using a lot of color, a lot of splashes of color like that, you make it easier when you do that. It can make it easier to go through and find your problem. You can do the same thing with borders. I already talked to you about the comments. Don't expect your pages to look exactly the same in all browsers. In other words, if I create a page, it won't look the same in Internet Explorer as it does in Firefox as it does in Google Chrome. Finally, be patient. I've talked about this a little bit before. Don't be afraid to walk away for a little bit if things aren't working. All right, the chapter ends on page 269 talking about some of these structural elements. These are some of the new structural elements that exist in HTML5. I'm going to leave that up there for a minute. I don't want to read it to you. It's not mandatory that you have any of them, and you can have more than one header element, more than one nav element. Typically, you wouldn't have more than one main element, and you can have more than one footer element. So you can have more than one of most of these. All right, I do want to show you a site that you might want to look at if you want more information. And there are plenty of them out there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, I think it's html5doctor.com. This site has got information, notice element index. So it's got every single element that's in there, and it's all in alphabetic order. html5doctor.com. Here's some more elements. All right, what HTML5 is attempting to do is to provide a lot more structure to your documents, and a more natural type of structure. Sometimes, in order to be able to make sure that your HTML5, if you use it in older browsers, it can sometimes wreak havoc. So what you have right here is called the HTML5 shim, or the HTML5 shiv, and what this is right here is it adds a JavaScript file that basically says, hey, if you've got an older browser and you attempt to use these HTML5 tags on it, basically just disregard them. If you want more, you can look up HTML5 shiv. Now on here, I don't know why they put this slide here, but it says deciding to configure a class or an ID. Key thing to realize, we just started on this. Classes begin with a dot in your CSS. IDs begin with a pound sign. Classes can be used more than one time on a page. IDs must be specific to only one element on a page. All right. So in this chapter, as it says, we looked a little bit more in depth on the box model, talked about the CSS pseudo classes, the hover, the link, etc. Talked about how to configure a 2-column page layout with CSS, and finally a couple of the additional HTML5 structure elements were discussed. All right, I'm going to stop right now and produce this, and when I get done, I'm going to come back and go right into Chapter 7. And Chapter 7, which starts in your book on page 295, is more on links, layout, and mobile. All right, so I'll be back with that shortly.